This video is sponsored by World Anvil. Earlier this year, one of my gaming groups put our Monster of the Week campaign on hold because the GM was experiencing burnout. We enjoyed that system a lot, but I don't know how challenging it was for him to run. Plus, I think the fact that his partner had just had a baby was a major contributing factor. So my brother-in-law, Danny, took up the mantle to run a game for us, and he offered to run our first Pathfinder game. We all said, sure, that sounds like fun. I think all of us had already had at least a passing interest in checking out Pathfinder even before the OGL crisis at the beginning of the year. But this meant I had to make my very first Pathfinder character. And this was a particularly interesting process because it involved so many different methods for choosing your character. We started with a setting/campaign pitch, which I'll make a whole other video talking about that kind of process for creating characters another day. I came up with multiple character concepts and compared them to the other ideas of the other people in the group. I answered backstory questions from our GM and fleshed out my character's relationship with the other characters. I made a character in a brand new system that I had never played, and I got a lot of advice from folks in my Twitch chat to do so. So today we're not going to drill down on the how-to for any of these processes. We're just going to go through how this character came together. The first thing that happened after we said, sure, let's try Pathfinder, was that maybe an hour or two later, Danny sent us a document of some ideas for the campaign setting, which he said he just threw something together quickly. It was over 3 pages long. Now, I've said before that less is more when it comes to world building, and in general, I stand by that advice. But the reason that advice is so useful is because, as a game master, we can become seduced by the allure of world building. And when that happens, it can be really difficult for us to make sure we're focusing our energy into the things that our players will actually care about. Danny sidestepped that issue in a few ways. First, he's been playing games with us since 2016, so he knows us really well at this point. And second, because he made sure that everything in the document was pretty much essential for us to know to make characters. I'm not going to recap the entire document here because that would make this video twice as long, but I'll hit some of the major beats. First, we got an introduction that gives us not the premise for the entire world, but the pitch for the campaign. There are 5 major houses that control the land, and countless minor houses vying for a piece of the pie. So that was the status quo. But then, very recently, a mysterious new environment appeared in the middle of the land, which we call the Vale. The big point of reference, at least for me, to help me imagine how a land could just appear somewhere, is like the Shimmer from Annihilation, or Tabula Rasa from Kieran Gillen's Uncanny X-Men run, although I believe it originated in Rick Remender's Uncanny X-Force run. So now, thanks to the Vale appearing in the middle of the land, there's open war, trade is completely screwed up, and the houses are losing their control over the people. We would play as members of the house that lived closest to the Vale, dealing with the economic disaster and the war, and trying to figure out what we're all going to do when the head of the house dies, which is not looking like it's too far away. But the adventure itself will take us into the Vale. Danny's only note about the Vale in this document was 2 words. Think Feywild. Just enough for us to prepare as players, but not enough to give us any major information that our characters wouldn't already have. Danny also included this note. Think about character concepts that are tied to House Kale and the other party members in some way. Perhaps one character is a young kin, lordling, and another party member is their fighting instructor who has taught generations of Kale kin, etc. And then the document included very brief write-ups about each of the other major houses, just 2 or 3 sentences each. Our own house, House Kyle, Kyle? I can never remember. It got 4 paragraphs with just a little bit of the house's history and reputation. Now, are we going to refer back to that section very often once we start playing? No, not necessarily, but that's because we've crafted characters who internalize some of the vibes of this description of House Kale. We might not go back and reread this entry, but that's because it's already present as we play the game. It's baked into the characters we're playing and the gameplay experience. Then we got a very brief rundown of the caste system, and specifically, how it presented different options for us as players. Our characters could be kin, retinue, or staff, and all of those have different levels of station within House Kale. Then we got a couple of sentences each about the neighboring nations, not a ton of detail, but just enough for us to know the essentials about what's going on at the edges of the map. And that was it. That was the document we got going into our session 0. And again, I want to applaud Danny for the efficiency of this document. Yeah, it's a lot of information, but it's not really lore. There's only one named character, the founder of our house, Lord Galen Kale. And there's only a few events mentioned in the document. The founding of the house, and the appearance of the Vale, which is specifically the major event that disrupted the status quo and sent our family on a trajectory toward ruin. And is also, the major location where it seems we'll spend most of the campaign adventuring. Of course, this document was also just something Danny whipped up in an afternoon. It's incredibly impressive, but obviously that meant that the presentation was pretty simple. It's just a standard Google Doc. If I can offer a little bit of constructive criticism, the document could have been made easier to read. Maybe instead of listing everything in the same document, some items could be broken off into their own separate pages so that we could go reference the information about the other houses if we wanted to, but we could have a separate page just dedicated to our house. I personally got slightly confused about the timeline. I thought the Veil appeared very recently, close to the beginning of the campaign, so putting a few key events into a clear timeline would have been a huge help. And of course, it would be great if there were places to add art, but in a way that reads really well on the page, like maybe the images could be integrated into the articles in a really clean way with easy-to-use templates. So if you want to go the extra mile and make your campaign information as easy to read as possible, check out today's sponsor, World Anvil. They do all the things that I was just talking about. I wasn't just spinning some hypothetical ideas for something someone could do. I was talking about World Anvil. All of that footage on the screen? That was from World Anvil. And World Anvil is offering a discount to viewers of this channel. Visit worldanvil.com/supergeekmike and use the promo code SUPERGEEK to save 40% off of any annual membership. Once again, that's worldanvil.com/supergeekmike, promo code SUPERGEEK. Thank you so much to World Anvil for sponsoring this video. So anyway, we received this document and we came up with some character concepts. Then we all got together for a call for our session 0. I came to the session with 3 character ideas. The first had the working title of Chaucer. The idea would be that this character was the attendant to a noble, specifically somebody with the emissary background. The main point of inspiration was Paul Bettany's character of Chaucer in A Knight's Tale. However, while most of us would instinctively roll up that character as a bard, that doesn't necessarily make a ton of sense. I mean, he doesn't have any magic powers, and if we're using him as the template for our character, why would that character have magic? I mean, they could, but first of all, there's a different major house where magic is much more common, and more importantly, it just didn't serve my idea of the core fantasy of that character. So instead, I imagined that he would be a fighter. He was a former knight. Well, he's still a knight, but a former warrior who is past his prime. Another point of inspiration were Sirs Jorah Mormont or Barristan Selmy, fighters who also act as the ambassador or agent for their noble ruler. Choosing a fighter would also help me get used to a new system. I do that a lot when I'm starting a new system. I almost always choose to play a fighter or the closest equivalent, because playing a martial character helps me understand the fundamentals of the system. We'll come back to that later. The second character was codenamed Paul, after Paul Atreides from the excellent Dune movie. I think it's based on a book or something? I don't know. Okay, joking aside, I have distinct memories of walking around my high school reading Dune, but absolutely no memories of that book, so full disclosure, the character was fully inspired by what I know from the movie. And this character would be a lordling of House Kale. He started manifesting magical powers that he does not know anything about, making him a sorcerer, and the powers are linked to the appearance of the Veil. Originally, I proposed that the powers just appeared, the same day as the Veil, but when I mentioned that idea during our session 0, Danny clarified that the Veil had been around for at least a decade. But that honestly kind of worked better. With Danny's blessing to push the first appearance of the Veil back another decade if I played the sorcerer, I revised the character so that he was born the same night the Veil first appeared. The third character, I honestly don't remember what the original codename was, so for the purposes of this video, let's call him Oaken, after Brett Spiner's character in Independence Day, although that's not how I would play the character. But this would be a wizard who has been working in the tower for his entire adult life, off on his own, on the property of House Kale, researching a magical subject for decades. He was so devoted to it and so out of touch with the rest of the world that he was mocked behind his back for years. But then the Veil appeared, and something about it is linked to his research. It's connected in some way. We could figure out those details if I picked that character. So they came knocking on his door and said that they needed his expertise. Again, like with the Lordling, this is an idea that needed a little bit of finessing to fit with the fact that the Veil did not just appear, it's been around for decades, but we would figure that out. And then, during the session 0, after I listed off my character ideas, one of my fellow players, Zach, replied, "We are so similar." Because it turns out he had almost the exact same 3 concepts. An older soldier who now trains the Lordlings in combat, a young Lordling with magic powers, and an old man wizard. By the way, there was no requirement that we come with those 3 character concepts. We just had a lot of parallel thinking. Anyway, our third player, Elliot, didn't have any specific concepts when he got to the session 0, but he was leaning towards a martial character who joined the house later in life. And then, it turned out, nobody wanted to be the first person to pick their character. We were all trying to be respectful of each other. So I ripped the band-aid off, and I said that whenever I start playing a new game system, I usually want to play a simpler class, a martial class often, so I can get the hang of the basics. And then, almost inevitably, I get bored with the character. The only exception I can think of was the Dragon Age RPG. I still had a ton of fun with that one. That's why I'm so excited to sink my teeth into Fantasy Age very soon. So again, anyway, I told them I don't want to play my fighter character. I'd instead rather play one of the other two concepts. And I kind of had a preference for the Sorcerer. It was the character I had the most ideas for, and his link to the Veil seemed like something that would be a ton of fun to play. Plus, since I'm not familiar with Pathfinder yet, and since we're playing in a brand new campaign setting, then playing a character who is basically unfamiliar with his own powers would help me justify that uncertainty and channel it into the canon of the game. I decided the wizard could be a backup character. That character concept could work at any level, unlike the sorcerer, who feels the most like a level 1 character. In fact, after our session 0, I wound up establishing the wizard as a backup character, but more on that in a bit. The reason I don't remember what the wizard's codename is because I did wind up naming him, Master Alessandro. I've since changed that to Maester Alessandro because Zach gave his character the title of Maester. He decided that he would play the warrior who trains the young nobles in combat. His character's name is Maester Harrow. His version is a monk, but the point of reference was very much Gurney Halleck from Dune. This is art of his own character. It's awesome. Elliot rolled up a barbarian who was a member of House Aranthi, the more magical house. He actually has a bunch of magical tattoos to make up for the fact that he never developed his own magic. His character's name is Prestidigio Aranthi. And as for how he joined House Kale, he's married to one of the sisters of my sorcerer. Elliot jokingly referred to his character's wife as Callie, and I riffed on that and said, Calliope could actually be a good name for the sister, which is especially funny because the one time I ran D&D for my real-life sister, her character's name was Calliope. Danny suggested that Calliope could be a backup character for me as well, so I decided that Calliope would be my character's twin, and she has basically the same powers as him. Except she's secretly in training with Maester Alessandro, so maybe she'll be a sorcerer and a wizard, but with whatever the Pathfinder equivalent of multiclassing is. Or maybe she'll be a full wizard, or maybe she'll be a bard, who knows? But she could be a higher level character because she's secretly been training with Maester Alessandro, so it'd be easier for her to join the campaign at higher levels if my character dies. Since Calliope is a Greek name, I decided to name my character with a Greek male name starting with a C, because all twins have to have names that rhyme or start with the same letter. That's the rule. And so, because I simply could not resist the pun, my spellcaster is named Caster Kale. However, that's all I had figured out during the session 0. All the rest of it, I worked out on Twitch. Now, right after the session 0, Danny gave us some questions for us to answer about our characters to help flesh out our backstories and solidify our connections with the other player characters. I started with those questions because answering those would make it easier to make the character sheet. If I knew Castor's backstory, I would be more informed when deciding on the spells and attributes. I'll read the final answers aloud because watching the Twitch stream and listening to me give these answers slowly while I type, maybe not the best content for YouTube, but I'm going to pepper in some highlights from the stream for when I was figuring out some of these answers. Question 1. How does Castor feel about his sister marrying a brute and an outsider? Castor feels it was a selfish decision on the part of both of them. Obviously, Presto was just trying to get into House Kale, but it was also selfish of Calliope to marry somebody based on her emotions rather than what is best for the house. At this point, some Twitch viewers described Castor as being kind of cutthroat, but I clarified. He doesn't have political goals. He just wants his family's approval. Playing at politics is how he gets that. Question 2. How does Castor feel about House Aranthi? That's the most magical of the major houses, and it's where Presto comes from. The shame Castor feels in his own magic is represented in the mistrust he holds for House Aranthi and their magical secrets. Question 3. How did Castor's powers first manifest? Did this cause problems? I decided to come back to this after picking my cantrips, since my cantrips would be the spells that I've had the longest, and those could help answer how my powers first developed. But there was a sub-question here. Is magical talent unusual for a Kale? Yes, very much so. None of Castor's older or younger siblings have magic, with the exception of his twin, Calliope. Question 4. Calliope's new husband seems to fit into House Kale better than Castor does. How does Castor feel about that? Castor blames his magic for the distance his family has kept him at for his entire life, and does not blame his parents for their mistrust of him. He probably should, but he doesn't. Question 5. How does Castor feel about the Veil? Castor's convinced that the Veil contains the answers for where his magic comes from, how to control it, and perhaps how to get rid of it. Although he maybe doesn't want that as badly as he might claim. Keenmer says this kid has issues, I love it. I hope you mean my character and not me, but also, yes. No, I think this is a really complex character. I like him. Because I think also, if you're going to play a political campaign, I think there's a virtue in making sure your character is really different from yourself. Because I think that's more interesting. So I think that there's the idea that he wants these sort of political things and has sort of conflicting motivations is really interesting to me. Question 6. How strong is Castor's loyalty to House Kale? Very strong. He only wants the best for the house, although he doesn't always know what that is. He fiercely loves and respects his father's judgment. Another factor might be that I've been watching a lot of Succession lately. Been catching up on that show. So the complex family dynamic is a part of that as well. Question 7. Where does Castor believe his powers come from? He links them to the Veil, and beyond that, he can only guess. He has spoken to Maester Alessandro multiple times about the magic of the Veil, but the old fool seems to have no answers. It seems Castor must seek these answers out himself. I honestly just included that reference to Maester Alessandro, so I wouldn't forget his name, since he is my backup character. Question 8. Does anyone know about your powers? The kin of House Kale know, and he assumes the retinue know as well. Some trusted members of the staff know, as they have helped clean up some of the incidents when he couldn't control his magic when he was younger. Castor does not realize that if even one member of the staff knows, everybody knows. Question 9. Who is Castor's favorite sibling? Why? At first, I answered Calliope, but then I realized I don't think that's true. He's ashamed of his powers, and his sister is secretly training to use hers better. They'll always have a connection, but they're not that similar, and they're probably not that close. So instead I came up with another one of Castor's many siblings. Leander, the oldest brother and next in line to assume the title of head of house. Leander has always been kind to Castor and promised him an important role in House Kale once he is the leader. I didn't realize it at the time, but looking back on these answers, I suspect Leander has the potential to be a pretty important character in the campaign. After all, we were told in the pitch document that the Patriarch's death is imminent. So since Leander is next in line, he's probably going to be pretty relevant. Aloexer says, older brother was kind in what way? Like, we will watch your career with great interest, or actually kind? Why not both? Apparently actually kind. Like, actually genuinely thinks well of him. Does that not mean that perhaps this is a political maneuver? Castor's not bright enough to understand that. Castor's too naive, I should say, to understand that. And this is ultimately Danny's decision to make. I think Leander probably genuinely does feel like it's crummy that Castor has been sort of Princess Elsa'd, right? He's not to the same degree as Elsa in Frozen, where like literally no one knows. Yeah, I think Leander probably genuinely felt bad for Castor, but also is not a dummy, is going to be in charge someday, and like, yeah, gotta have the court mage in his back pocket, says Princess Salami. Kiminer says having a guy who can turn your enemies into sheep with a thought is useful, especially if they're kin. Yep, he's not dumb. Question 10. Is Castor a good student? At first, I said, nope. But then I changed my mind. He wants to be better at statecraft. So instead I answered that he is very attentive to the lessons he can learn about politics. But that doesn't always mean that he has good instincts when it comes to these matters. What's also nice is that this answer gives me some wiggle room to not commit to whether or not he's smart or not, or wise or not, because I hadn't figured out his stats yet. Good at remembering, maybe not so good at actually learning. No, I think, again, this is the Succession influence. It's all these characters on Succession who are, like, kind of bad at, like, political plays. Like, kind of bad at politics, and I think that's entertaining. Interesting. Frustrating to watch that show, where they're like, no one on that show is as slick as they think they are. So it's interesting, like, I don't know how he's going to be in, when it actually comes to that. I don't know how good he is at politics yet, because I haven't played the character yet. I haven't played in this world yet, and I haven't played with the system of roles and how that works yet. So being able to say, maybe he's good, maybe he's not, is useful to me. Then I answered the question about Castor's relationship with the other player characters. Castor has a lot of respect for Maester Harrow, especially since Harrow is so familiar with the challenges of the outside world, which Castor has yet to experience. As for Prestidigio Aranthe, my sister's husband and an outsider with barbarian stats, I answered that our relationship is complicated. Intellectually, Castor knows that he's in competition with Presto for the respect of the house leadership and for responsibilities in the house. Pragmatically, he knows that Presto is an outsider and probably cannot be trusted. From a class perspective, Presto is a brute who has no place at a dining table and probably would be happier eating with the pigs. But emotionally, Presto is a breath of fresh air. He is completely unlike anyone else in the house, and unlike anyone Castor has ever met in his entire privileged life. Presto actually tells him the truth. So he can't help but like Presto, despite every reason he is given to distrust him. Princess Salami says your fanfic reader brain went, Castor is jealous of his sister and would have wanted to be the one to marry Presto. Listen, I was thinking about that exact question today. I didn't land on it because I think partially because I want the dynamic to be really different if I do end up dying and playing Calliope. Albert says the more Mike is typing, the likelier that scenario seems. Listen, never say never. But, even in our Monster of the Week game, my character canonically had a crush on Elliot's character, and just it never really manifested in the way the characters were played, so I don't know that I can really guarantee that a crush would make sense. Yes, well, as Aloexer says, Castor might not even know it himself. Yeah, maybe. Originally, I had started to answer that Castor and Presto were basically in competition to see who could produce an heir and secure their place in the succession first. But then I realized this is still a team game, and that would suck. I don't want to play someone who already dislikes another player character on such a fundamental level. It would not be fun. So then I answered the first question. Just simply, what is Castor's backstory? First, I rolled 2d20s to determine where he falls in the line of succession. At first, I got something kind of high, like a 3, and that was too close. That was too much authority for him, for the character that I'm imagining. So I rolled again and got an 11, and that was much more in line, no pun intended, with what I was imagining. Then I rolled to see if Castor or Calliope were born first, and it was decided Calliope, so she's the 10th in line. And then I needed the name of my father. One of the people in chat, Kaminer, had suggested Pollux when I was naming my favorite brother, so I used that name for my father. And then I realized that Castor and Pollux were siblings in Greek myth, but that still worked. It would make it easier to remember the name, and it still linked to them in an interesting way. Of course, Kaminer wasn't referencing that Greek myth, or at least not directly. He was referencing Pollux Troy, brother of Castor Troy, who was Nicolas Cage's character in the John Woo film Face Off. So with all those elements determined, I had my character's backstory. Castor Kale was born 11th in line of succession at House Kale, just after his twin sister Calliope, and he was born the same night the veil first appeared. Early in life, the twins discovered that they had unexplained magical powers. Castor and Calliope were kept at a distance from most political duties, except for public appearances, since their father Pollux greatly mistrusts the veil and associates their magic with its arrival. Castor has only mastered a few spells, but otherwise he keeps his magic contained and does not test himself. However, he also knows that the veil contains answers, and one day he may be forced to go find those answers if no one else can. So then I used Path Builder to build my Pathfinder character, and we can go ahead and jump over to see that process. Except, honestly, no, we can't. This video is taking a lot longer than I expected it to, so we're actually going to break this into 2 videos, and on Monday I'm going to post a hopefully shorter video showing the highlights of the process as I made this character in Path Builder, which is an online resource you can use to make a Pathfinder character for free. In the meantime, I want to let you know some cool things. I made an appearance on the Sidekicks and Side Quests podcast. That show brings on guests who basically create an NPC live on the podcast, somebody that you can just drop into your RPG game, and then we also try to come up with a side quest that the character could give to the party. That episode should be up by now. I wound up creating an NPC who will almost certainly wind up in my next Ravenloft campaign, so go check that out. Again, it's called Sidekicks and Side Quests. If you want to help the channel grow, please make sure to like and subscribe and ring the bell. If you want to support me financially, you can join my Patreon. If you want to hang out with other awesome people who can recommend other RPGs besides D&D, a bunch of awesome RPG fans are in my Discord server, so you should come and hang out there. Follow me on Twitch to catch my live streams and sign up for my newsletter to get my updates. If you are struggling to get people to play games like Pathfinder, I recommend you watch this video right here. It might help get to the bottom of that. Until next time, play fair and have fun.